What is the weirdest thing you've seen at someone's house? I had a friend in elementary school who was not allowed into the sitting room or dining room. He had a hamster that he was allowed to put into a ball that would run around the house. One day the hamster got into the forbidden zone and he freaked out. He was seriously worried, but his parents were not home. He didn't know what to do, but he assumed they would be more angry if he left the hamster in that room. So he went in and got the hamster out. As soon as his parents came home, he ran downstairs and apologized for the footprints on the carpet. He said, "I'm sorry about the footprints on the carpet. The hamster went into there and I had to get it out." They looked like they were going to talk to him about it later. It was nutty.
That reminds me of a time when I had a friend who was super strict about rules at home. He had this dog that loved to sneak into places it wasn't allowed. One day, the dog got into the kitchen, and he panicked. He rushed in, grabbed the dog, and tried to clean up the mess it made. When his parents got home, he just owned up to it. Sometimes you just gotta face the music.
A friend of mine had converted her loft space into a spare room, which her ex-boyfriend moved into after they split up. They were not living together prior to the split. I always found that a bit weird, because he had to go into her bedroom and pull down the loft ladder to access his own room. It must have been awkward when they had new boyfriends/girlfriends staying over.
That sounds pretty uncomfortable. It's strange to share the same space like that after a breakup. I can't imagine needing to climb a ladder just to get to your room, especially with the potential for awkward encounters. Must have been a tough situation for both of them. Kind of a reminder of why clean breaks are usually better.
When I was 12, a friend of mine invited me over to her friend's house to swim in her pool. She shows us to her room to change, and as I'm changing, I hear my friend whisper, "What the hell?" I turn and look, and there are about 8 to 10 used maxi pads lined up on this girl's desk. The girl comes in shortly after, and my friend flat out asks her what the pads were all about. Apparently her parents made her do that so they could check she wasn't pregnant and or being sexually active. I found out later that the parents were super religious, and this was their way of knowing that their daughter was still pure.
That's a wild story. It's strange how some parents keep such tight control. I remember a similar situation with a friend's family. They had a lot of strict rules too, always checking to see what we were up to. Made us feel like we were under constant supervision. It was awkward, but I guess they thought it was for the best. Just a different way of raising kids, I suppose.
Walked into my friend's kitchen. He says I could grab anything I wanted out of his pantry. I see boxes and boxes of expired food. I'm not just talking about food that expired a month ago or even a year ago. I'm talking about expiration dates from 1995. There were plenty of different snack foods with similar expiration dates. He thought this was completely normal and that the food still has taste. I was afraid of opening anything I found. Edit. This happened around September 2014.
Pretty wild experience. Walking into a friend's kitchen and finding food expired since '95 is something else. His casual attitude about it just adds to the absurdity. Makes you wonder what he considers acceptable. I guess he thinks taste doesn't really fade. I definitely would have hesitated to open those boxes. Sometimes you just find yourself in strange situations with friends.
When I was 5, I went over to a friend's house. She offered me a snack, and I accepted. The snack was cinnamon graham crackers that she dug out of the depths of the couch. And I don't mean a package of graham crackers. She just fished out the bare crackers themselves, and we had a nummy snack. At the time, I just thought that was very convenient. In retrospect, I can see where I might be mistaken.
That's a memorable snack choice. Kids don't really mind where food comes from, I guess. It's funny how you remember those small moments. Looking back, it's wild to think about eating snacks you found in the couch. It's kind of gross now, but at the time, it seemed normal. Just goes to show how carefree you can be as a kid.
When I was 16, my friend moved from her mom's house to her dad's house because he couldn't pay child support anymore, so her sister stayed with her mom, and she stayed with her dad. Then it was an even split. He lived in a trailer on a large piece of land in the middle of nowhere. I go over one day for a sleepover, and her dad isn't there. The next day, not there. The next day, no dad. When I asked where he was, she said he didn't live there. He lived with his mom. His mom just paid for her to live there. It seemed cool at the time. Many awesome parties were had, many bad parties were had. But looking back on it, WDH, a 16-year-old girl, lived there all alone in the middle of nowhere.
It's wild how sometimes you don't really think about things when you're young. Your friend lived in the middle of nowhere without her dad around. It seemed fun at the time with all the parties, but it must have felt pretty lonely too. I can't imagine the anxiety of being that age and handling everything on her own. Definitely a different perspective looking back.
This actually happened about a week ago when I went with my friend to his cousin's house to watch the Super Bowl. There's 3 roommates well into their 20s. All live in a small basement, their beds literally touching each other. There's a kitchen down there, garbage all over the floor, and when I got there around 5 p.m., neither one of them had gotten out of bed. Mind you, in the floors above, they have perfectly good and ready rooms for each individual.
So, I went to watch the Super Bowl at my friend's cousin's place. The vibe was really something. 3 guys living in this cramped basement. It was messy, with trash everywhere, and it was 5 p.m. and they were still in bed. I couldn't believe it. They had actual rooms upstairs, but chose to stick to that tiny space. It was a strange sight, but kind of what you'd expect from some college years.
It's not that weird, but I remember hanging out at my friend's house when I was a kid and I was going to sleep over, so I was there around 24 hours. His family didn't drink anything unless they were eating a meal. It's like they had 3 drinks a day, whereas my family pretty much had a drink around whenever we were in the house, even if it was just a warm glass of water. I was so used to always having something to drink that when I was sitting in my friend's house, I felt like I was going to die from dehydration. I kept asking for something to drink, but I didn't want to do it too much that I was annoying. At the time, there was something really strange to me, and they probably thought I was the strange one.
That's an interesting experience. You don't really think about how different family habits can be until you're in someone else's space. I can imagine sitting there, feeling parched and trying not to be a bother. It's kind of funny looking back at it now. I guess it shows how our environments shape what we consider normal. Just goes to show everyone has their own way of living.
A pet raccoon that had free roam of the entire house. I was friends with twins growing up, and their dad owned his own construction business. While demolishing a house, he accidentally killed a mama raccoon and ended up taking her baby home to the family to keep as a pet. I did not know this when I visited their house once and saw the thing emerge from a laundry basket in the hallway, and I completely freaked out. The 2 brothers were trying to figure out why I was reacting that way. I'm still good friends with them to this day. This incident occurred in the mid-80s.
That's an interesting story. A pet raccoon is definitely not something you see every day. I can imagine walking into a friend's house and having a raccoon suddenly pop out of a laundry basket. That would catch anyone off guard. It's cool that you're still friends after all these years. Moments like those really stick with you and create some unique memories.
Have you ever been into the home of someone with OCD? The lady that used to live across the street from us was OCD. At 7 a.m., she would emerge from the house in perfect hair and makeup and begin her routine. Her lawn was immaculate. The grass was mowed with this ridiculously expensive lawn mower, which is something that would be used to mow the grass on a golf course. The curb was lined with brick, and she would go down the curb with a toothbrush and clean between the bricks every day. She would sweep her grass. Her son was not allowed to play in the grass. The shrubs and flowers were perfectly trimmed. The first time I visited the inside of her house, I was afraid to move. I remember looking at the rug in the entry foyer, which we were not allowed to step on. The tassels on the end of the rug had been perfectly straightened out, and it looked like they had been ironed. You would have never known that a child lived in that house. It had to be pretty miserable for him.
I remember a friend who had a neighbor like that. Their place was always spotless. You could tell everything was in its exact place, almost like a showroom. The kids had to be super careful just walking around. It seemed really stressful for them, always worried about messing something up. It's wild how some people have to maintain that level of order, while others are okay with a little chaos in their lives.
This happened to my girlfriend when she was in uni. She's over at her friend's house staying the night. This is her first time there, and everything seems normal. Parents seem nice. While they're getting ready for bed, her mom shouts up and asks if either of them would like a cup of tea. My girlfriend declines the offer, but her friend shouts back, "Yes, please. And will you put it in my bottle?" At first, my girlfriend thought maybe she misheard. But sure enough, her mom comes upstairs with some tea in a baby's bottle. My girlfriend and her friend were around 20 at the time, and she said it was one of the strangest things she's ever seen.
That's a pretty odd situation. It's funny how some things just stick with you. I can imagine my friend being in that moment, trying to hold back laughter. A baby's bottle for tea at that age? Just goes to show how families can be different. Sometimes you get caught off guard by the little rituals or habits people have. It's one of those memories that makes you appreciate life's quirks a bit more.
Dozens of 2-liter soda bottles. Family of 5. It doesn't seem so bad if they stock up like that for a month maybe, but his mother goes shopping every 3 days to get more soda. 5 people are going through nearly 30 bottles of soda in 72 hours. Edit, I choose to believe that the amount of soda they get isn't always this high, but he was a close friend, and his mother always seemed to be coming home with more soda.
That's something, right? I had a friend whose family did the same with snacks. Every weekend, they'd clear out the local store's supply of chips and sodas. It's wild how quickly a family can go through that much. Made me think about how some habits stick around. We used to joke about their snack stockpiling while we munched on a few chips, but it was just their routine.
I had a friend from a hippie family growing up. In their bathroom was a paper grocery bag next to the toilet, and a note above it said, "If it's yellow, let it mellow. If it's brown, flush it down. Toilet paper in the bag for compost, please." They were a clean family, but the bathroom always smelled like old pee.
That's an interesting setup. It sounds like a classic case of trying to live sustainably, but sometimes those methods can have mixed results. I get the intention, but it's kind of surprising how that can affect the overall vibe of a place. Definitely a memorable experience, though. You don't forget a bathroom like that.
My wife and I were sitting down for dinner at my grandma's house. We were all having spaghetti, Gma's favorite. I get a text and look down at my phone. It's from my wife, who is sitting across from me, and is bright red. The text reads, "Turn around, there's something in the hutch." It can't be what I think it is. I turn my head around, confused, and amidst all the knickknacks, statuettes, and trinkets in the hutch of her china cabinet is a huge glass dildo. I immediately turn around, look at my wife with wide eyes, nodding. It is definitely what she thinks it is. It's unmistakably a glass dildo. On a stand, a glass dildo next to china plates. A glass dildo. That's when my grandma bursts out laughing. Most people don't notice it. Your wife's got a good eye.
That's a wild dinner story. I mean, finding a glass dildo in your grandma's china cabinet isn't something you expect. The best part has to be your wife's reaction, all red while texting you about it. And then your grandma just laughing it off like it's normal. Gotta love family dinners, though. They always surprise you in the most unexpected ways. Definitely makes for a memorable meal.
My middle school crush addressed her parents with C, the polite form of you in German. which is basically like calling your parents dear sir and dear madam. Also, she was never allowed to go on school trips, had to attend sext against her parents' wishes, and was generally rather piously Catholic. She did turn out to be a lesbian, though.
That's an interesting story. It's wild how people can grow up in such strict environments and still figure themselves out. The whole thing is pretty formal for parents. It makes you think about how upbringing shapes us. It's good that she found her own path, even if it didn't align with her parents' beliefs. Life's all about figuring things out in the end.
I was dating an Asian girl, and like many Asians, extended family seemed to share a large house. There was my girlfriend's grandparents, her mother, her auntie, and her cousin all living in the house. I had been there a few times and guess I hadn't noticed lights always being on, but this time was the first night I slept over. They have their bedroom lights off and all the other lights in the house turned on. I asked my girlfriend why they leave the lights on, apparently because they're trying to save energy and are using energy-saving bulbs. They think that leaving these lights turned on, they are saving energy and getting a cheaper electricity bill. I explained to my girlfriend that that is stupid. She understood when I told her, but never told her family about it, because she's not allowed to tell her elders that they're wrong, etc.
It's interesting how different cultural views can be. I once had a friend whose family operated on some old habits too. They used to leave all the lights on in the house, claiming it was better for the environment. We ended up having a long talk about energy savings, but like your girlfriend, she never said anything to her family. Some things just don't change, no matter how much you know.
Somewhere around 6th grade, I stayed over at a friend's house for the first time. It was my first sleepover since moving to a new state. We do the usual play stuff outside. Chasing a sister around and blowing stuff up with firecrackers cause his family ran a stand, and he had tons. It comes time for sleep, and we head downstairs to the kids' area. Downstairs was basically just a playroom and bedroom for the kids. My friend asked me if I want to see something cool. He lifts a plywood sheet in the middle of the room to reveal a big hole. They were digging a tunnel outside. The parents totally knew and didn't care. They busted straight through the foundation and made a tunnel about 10 foot out. Two things. There was no support in there at all, and my friend nonchalantly mentioned that yet a ton of spiders seemed to get in through the hole too. Hobo spiders. Big, poisonous, aggressive, asshole spiders. I did not sleep well that night.
That sounds like a wild first sleepover. Kids always have the craziest ideas. Digging tunnels under the house is something I can't imagine parents being okay with, but I guess some were just chill about it. The spider part is grim though. I wouldn't have slept either, especially with those kinds of spiders lurking around. It's funny how those moments stick with you, even years later.
During high school, my girlfriend came to stay at my house for the weekend. We sat down with my family for your average bacon and eggs breakfast. Everything was going great until my mom brought the rice cooker over to the table and I started dishing up. My GF says WTF is with the rice? And I'm like, what do you mean? And she's like, why are you eating rice with bacon and eggs? And I just replied, what the hell do you eat bacon and eggs with? And that's how I figured out that it's not normal to eat rice with your bacon and eggs. I should mention that my family is Chinese, though I'm 5th generation Australian.
That's a funny moment. It's interesting how food traditions can vary so much. I guess people just assume certain pairings are normal. Your girlfriend's reaction makes sense. Most people don't think of rice with breakfast. It's cool that your family kept that tradition alive. Shows how diverse cooking can be, even within the same country. Glad you figured it out in a light-hearted way.
My friend and his parents, all ranging from overweight to obese, used to sit on their couch and watch Richard Simmons sweating to the oldies videos. They didn't do any of the exercises, just sat and watched and made comments on how much weight people in the videos had lost over the course of the series.
That's a pretty funny situation. It's like they were doing their own version of a workout by just critiquing from the sidelines. I guess they found a way to enjoy the show without actually getting off the couch. Sometimes it's just about the vibes and not the action, right? Makes you think about how people find motivation in different ways, even if it's just watching others do the work.
My answer from last time a similar question was asked. I was visiting a friend one time, and we were about to go buy a 30 rack at the nearby liquor store. I tell him we need to stop by an ATM so I can pick up some cash to pay. He just turns and looks at me and goes, "Don't worry about it, we can just go to the money drawer." This kid's family literally kept a drawer full of $20 bills in the kitchen that you could just walk up to and grab whenever you needed something. It was pretty surreal.
I remember a similar situation. I was with a buddy, and we were planning a road trip. He mentioned he needed gas money, but then he just reached into this old box in his room. Turns out, it was full of random cash his parents kept for emergencies. It was wild how casual he was about it. I guess some families have their ways of handling money that seem normal to them.
A friend of mine had a Siamese cat. Really cool cat. It was pretty much an indoor cat. However, they would let it in the backyard with a chain tied around its neck and 1 kilogram weight at the other end of the chain. I remember thinking that the metric weight was odd, like from a fancy scale or something. The chain had like 3 foot of slack. Just enough if he wanted to jump the chain link fence, it would hold him back. He would take off running in the yard and cut real quick. The weight would continue along his original path and wrap around a tree like a boat towing a tube or a game of tetherball. The cat would damn near lose his head, shake it off, and keep going. I just thought it was weird to tether a cat to the ground with a ball and chain like that. He had the weirdest meow too. It was just Mo rhymes with wow. I used to think the ball and chain wrecked his meow.
That's a pretty strange setup. I get the idea behind wanting to keep the cat in the yard, but using a ball and chain seems a bit much. I can picture that cat running with the weight trailing behind. It must have looked comical but also kind of risky. As for the meow, it's funny how some pets have unique sounds. Makes you wonder how much their environment shapes them.
At a friend's house, they had a dresser with a full complement of family photos and frames on display. All generations of their family over many years. In the middle, as if it belonged, was a picture of a giraffe. In its own frame, slap bang in the center of the arrangement. When questioned, no one could explain its presence or who had put it there. This is in the UK, so pet giraffes are on the rare side. They also couldn't understand why I found it odd. They took it down after years of me laughing at it every time I came over. I now regret this. I miss Jeffrey so much.
That giraffe sounds like it added a unique touch to their family display. It's funny how some items can just fit in, even when they don't belong. I get why you found it odd. It was probably a conversation starter. It's interesting how something so random can create lasting memories. It's a bummer they took it down. Sometimes those quirky things become part of the charm of a place. Glad you have those laughs to look back on.
Several years ago, I had been casually seeing this guy. He invited me over to his place one day, so I went. He gave me no heads up whatsoever and didn't even mention it. So I got there, to this house of animals, ferrets, dogs, cats, and birds. There was shit everywhere. I mean, literally piles of shit throughout the house. A completely full and overflowing litter box in the living room. A ferret cage with lots of shit and pee right at the edge of the kitchen. The stench was something I've never experienced before. It was his mom's house and her animals. She was a nice lady, but spent all her time off work doped up on pills and in her bed. It was a horrible sight, situation, and smell. The smell, but he just acted like it wasn't anything to mention. So yeah.
That sounds rough. You probably weren't expecting that when you went over. It's wild how some people can be oblivious to their living conditions. It's a shame the mom couldn't manage things better. Must have been awkward trying to navigate that whole environment. Guess that guy didn't think it was a big deal. It's definitely a red flag when someone doesn't acknowledge their surroundings. Not the best first impression.
When I was about 13, I visited my friend's house before school so we can walk together. I found it weird that she had buckets outside one of the rooms. I walked up to it and saw there was water in it, and for some reason started splashing it with my finger until my friend told me it was filled with pee. Apparently her little brother is too lazy to go to the bathroom, and their mom bought him a bucket to pee in and leave outside the door so she can throw it out.
That's a pretty strange situation. I mean, using a bucket like that is just odd. You'd think the kid would just take the few extra steps to the bathroom. It's kind of funny but also kind of gross at the same time. Just a reminder that not all households operate the same way. Definitely an interesting school morning for you, that's for sure.
Went over to some random person's house for a small party of mostly people I didn't know because I liked the girl that invited me. Pretty low-key. About an hour into this little hangout, the host goes over to the kitchen sink and takes down one of about 6 mason jars full of what I now see is marijuana. Turns out when he and his sister turned 18, his parents came out as longtime pot smokers. From then on, they just kept it above the sink and would smoke weed during family board games. Edit. This got way more responses than I thought it would. I'm getting a lot of mixed messages. Let me say, I hadn't smoked yet at the time this happened, so it was pretty bizarre to me. Now that I've been doing this for a while, I find it still out of the ordinary, but not crazy unheard of. And I live in New England.
So I went to this party, right? Barely knew anyone there, just like the girl who invited me. Pretty chill vibe. At one point, the host pulls down a mason jar from above the sink, and it's full of weed. Turns out, his parents had been smoking since they were teens, and it became a family thing during board games. I wasn't smoking back then, but it was just weird to see.
I'm a piano teacher that goes to my students' houses. I go to this one house for a first lesson. The house is a very small ranch. I walk in the living room, and there is a life-size painting hanging covering an entire wall of Michelangelo creation. Taught the entire lesson to a 7-year-old little girl with a life-size naked Adam next to me. When I went the next week, the painting was gone. Another house I go to has Buddha on one wall and Jesus on the other right across from each other. They seem to be staring at each other. Jesus is on the cross and grimacing, and Buddha seems to be smiling at him. It's kind of weird. There also is a giant Buddha statue right by the piano that I sometimes find I'm resting my arm on his stomach accidentally.
That's a pretty interesting teaching gig you've got. Walking into a house with a giant painting of Adam must have been something else. I mean, trying to focus on piano while that's right next to you is a unique challenge. The other place sounds even weirder, with Buddha and Jesus facing off like that. I can't help but wonder what kind of vibe those lessons had with such a setup. You definitely get to see some different home aesthetics.
When I would spend the night at my cousin's house, I saw a couple of things that just struck me odd. First, my aunt would eat raw hamburger out of the package. Not like a little bit. She would get a pound of hamburger out of the fridge, park her but on the sofa, and eat the entire package with a fork. The other thing they did was instead of washing their dishes after a meal, they would let their dogs like them clean and put them back in the cabinet. They acted like this was normal behavior. Hell, maybe it is, and I'm the nut bar.
That's interesting. It's wild how some families have their own quirks that seem totally normal to them. Eating raw hamburger is a bold choice for sure. And letting dogs clean the dishes? That's never something I would have imagined. It kind of makes you question what you grew up thinking was the norm. I guess we all have our unique perspectives on what's weird or not.
I haven't thought of this for many years, but it is a good story. I was working as a telemarketer at a large call center around the year 2000. Basically everyone there were huge potheads, including myself. After work, I went with this guy I didn't really know to a shitty little apartment to buy a bag from him. He starts showing me some of his stuff, most interesting of which was a freaking bazooka. I'm talking a real-deal shoulder-launch World War II looking bazooka. It got even weirder when his inbred-looking girlfriend showed up, and as I was trying to do the old, oh look at the time gotta go routine, we were all outside when an older dude pulls up. Turns out it is the girl's father, whom she has never met. Tears and cliches ensued like it's so nice to have a face to go along with the voice, etc. I was way too high for that shit, and I got the fuck out of there. TLDR weed dealer with bazooka and a Maury Povich episode in his front yard.
That's a wild story. Just picture this random high moment turning into a family reunion. Like, the last thing you'd expect while buying some weed is a guy showing off a bazooka. It's already a strange vibe, but then the whole long-lost father thing kicks in. I'd probably want to ghost as well. Sometimes you just gotta dip when the situation's too weird, you know?
The first time I went to a sleepover at a friend's house after moving to America, before we ate, they did this weird thing where we held hands and started reciting some weird gibberish. Now I know they were saying grace, but at the time I thought they were summoning a ghost or something, and spent the entire night afraid.
That sounds like a memorable experience. It can be strange when you encounter new traditions. I remember feeling out of place at a friend's family dinner once. They had a similar ritual, and I just sat there confused. It's funny how those moments can stick with you, especially when you're trying to fit in somewhere new. It makes you realize how different customs can feel a bit eerie at first.
House party when I was 16 to 17 or something. A guy in my class was hosting a party with almost the entire class plus friends at his house. On top of a cabinet next to the computer in the living room was his mom's massage wand, essential massage oil, Kama Sutra oils, and incenses and stuff. It was a huge pile of sex stuff with a big corded vibrator on top. When we asked what's up with the pile of sex oils and the vibrator, he was just like, "Oh, that's mom's stuff," like it was completely normal. I mean, it is pretty normal to own a vibrator. What is not normal, however, is leaving it around for the party like it was a vase or potted plant or something. He had even cleaned the house and prepared for the party with extra chairs, glasses, ice cubes, etc. But didn't put his mom's sex toys away. That was weird as fuck.
I remember a party like that back in high school. A friend had stuff out in plain sight, just like you described. Everyone acted like it was no big deal, but it felt off. He had cleaned up everywhere else, yet left that pile exposed. It was awkward when people asked about it. We all laughed it off, but you could tell some were just trying to avoid the topic. Definitely a memorable night.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.